Welcome. My name is Sally Lyons Wyatt. I am a global EVP and chief advisor for Circana's CPG and food service department. And I am thrilled to be with you today. We are going to tackle a really big topic around how to find growth in CPG today. We will use a lot of food and beverage examples, but I will pepper in non-food points as well, just for time's sake. The headline is it's all about what's transcended over the last few years that are impacting what consumers are doing today. Since 2020, the industry has benefited from top line growth, but that has slowed. And volume growth is back, but not for everyone. So some of you on the line have seen it and some have not. Consumers have fundamentally changed how they view value and how they shop. And so now it's more important to understand the consumer in different ways than ever before. We have been talking to many of you, but some of you may not know the big headline of 2024, which was for the first time in 3 years, we actually saw volume increase in this industry. So that's a big deal. Part of what you can see on this page, at the top, you see the volume growth. So you can see how in 22 and 23, we struggled to see growth, and then 24, we've seen it. You can see from a price index, everybody needs to remember that 22 and 23 were years where we saw heavy inflationary pricing, but it started to soften the back half of 23, and it has remained soft throughout this year. So that's why you see the index of 102. Just for frame of reference, in normal times where we're not in a compounded growth rate for pricing, 2 to 3% is the norm. We've actually been hovering at a lower than norm throughout the whole year. And what that has done is even though we have volume growth, it's on a lower price versus year ago. Therefore, you can see that the dollars have also softened. But the good news is it's not just top line growth. We're actually growing volume. Now, there was a marker in the year that really kind of drove that. And as we look at food and beverage specifically, when we took a look at in-home and out-of-home, it's about a $1.7 trillion spend, broken out at about 61% being retail and 39% being food service. Through this year, one of the key things that happened is as the softening of prices happened at retail, they did not soften at food service. In fact, they really couldn't because of labor. Therefore, foot traffic declined across food service. And that foot traffic was across all of the different operators, with the exception of fast casual. And then we also found growth in non-commercial. That would be places like hospitals and schools that fit into that bucket. Even workplace fits into that bucket. So many of you may be saying, but wait a second. We have all these meal deals. Hasn't that helped? Well, it has. The foot traffic for the meal deals have been on an uptick, but that's about 29% of the traffic, and it is outpacing total food service, but it just cannot erase all the loss that we've seen so far this year. So they are positive, they are helping, but not being able to defray the loss. So in general, as we keep going through this, volume growth was food and non-food. One of the big drivers for food has been this break between food service and in-home. But there's been some other factors too. So we're going to talk about it. As we go and look at how this broke out throughout 24, on the left-hand side, you see dollars and you see retail and food service. On the right-hand side, you see volume. The purple is volume at retail. The pink is actually foot traffic because there's just not a way to equivalize the volume for food service. But this is a good proxy. And you can again see that in 23, food service was outpacing retail. The one word I use for 23 is the year of mobility. So mobility is the one word. That was the year that at the end of 22, you had companies saying, please come into the office more than 1 or 2 days a week. And so we did see that uptick. And what that meant is more people were getting in their cars, getting on trains, walking to their work establishment more days than not. So therefore, there was an uptick in food service. There was an uptick in convenience. People were getting out of their homes. They were getting their breakfast sandwich in a drive-through. They were getting their specialty coffee. They were getting, they might have even been picking up something on their way home from work for the evening occasion. That all changed when we got into 24. Consumers decided, you know what, I cannot afford to do that anymore. Maybe it was that their specialty coffee was costing them more than their budget would allow. Maybe they figured out they could get a quick meal at home for breakfast as opposed to the time it took to get to where they were going, go through the drive-through, and pay that incremental money. But whatever the drivers were, you can see the flip where we go into Q1 and the reverse happens. Now retail started to outpace food service. So there is a correlation there, but again, not the only driver. In fact, we feel there are two main ways in which consumers have been influenced with what they're doing and what they buy, where they buy, how they buy, what they eat, where they eat, who they eat, all of that. And that's two themes. One is pervasive value, driven by compounded price. The other is unscripted consumer, based on shifting behaviors. Now, again, a lot of the examples we're using are food and beverage, but these two work whether you're looking at food and beverage or non-food. It just, how you do it and what categories they're emphasizing is a little different. When you think about pervasive value, we still are running around a 30% higher prices than 2019. So that compounded impact for consumers has absolutely had an impact. And I am often asked, do you see the consumer behaviors being similar to other macroeconomic situations of the past, maybe recession, inflationary, whatever it might have been? And I normally say, in total, no. In some individual things like trading down to private label, yes, they've done that in the past. Yes, they might have changed where they shop, but not like they're doing now. Maybe they've been changed their trip types, nothing to the degree that we're seeing now. So in totality, we see these shifts being something that have absolutely been instrumental in this volume growth we're seeing. So let's dive into them. First, with pervasive value, there's four main things that really have impacted consumers in their decisions. One is that decision of where they're going to go and buy the products that they're looking for. And we have seen some very big shifts to value channels and e-com. And the value channels would include mass, club, dollar, for example. The e-com, what's fascinating about e-com, and I have a slide to share with you in a moment, but what's fascinating is when you take the brick and mortar e-com and the pure play e-com, it's driving 35% of food and beverage volume growth. That is dramatic. And that's there, it's only 10% of sales. So 10% doing 35% of the growth is significant. The second decision is, what products do I buy? And we've seen more of an uptick, some growth on private brands. Doesn't mean national brands aren't being bought, but they're relatively flat. Private brands saw an increase of about 3% from a volume perspective. We also, however, see bifurcation still happening with the consumer's choice. And this goes into, I talk about consumer psyche. Anyone that's heard me recently will know that this is probably one of my favorite topics, which is the consumer psyche of trying to figure out, what am I going to buy? And oh, by the way, I do this too. Our family is not eating out as much as we used to. We're not buying as many clothes as we used to, not buying as many video games as we used to. We actually are part of the exact same trend of what we're seeing from a macro perspective, but we will go and invest in a higher quality brand to have a different experience at home than maybe we would have done on an everyday occasion. And therefore, people are willing to invest another $1 or $2 into that more premium brand. And so we do a tiered approach to look at that. And when we did that recently, we found private label growing at 3%, but premium priced products at 2% and super value priced products at 4%. I want to note that when we do this, this isn't based on how things are marketed. This is purely based on price. So it takes the marketing out of it. The other piece, if you'll remember, I talked about 23 being the year of mobility and that convenience saw an uptick. Well, 24, given that consumers were doing more at home and we saw some higher gas prices throughout this year, then convenience has had a little bit of a loss. And it's weighting down our big MULO Plus universe with convenience. But I think overall, convenience will come back. I just feel like they had to overlap a really big year of mobility and a year of turmoil as far as gas prices and prices in the store and what consumers were seeking from a value perspective. I think that we will see them bounce back, but for now, that's been a decline. So let's dig into a few of these a little bit more. Private brands versus national brands. On the left-hand side, you'll see the premium national brand and some of the different categories where premium is growing, and it shows you the premium dollar share, also the share change that's happened over the past year. On the right-hand side, you see private label, and again, private label share and the change over the last year. The ones that are in the peachy orange, I'm not sure what color you would call that, but that peachy orange, those show up on both lists. And those are back to the consumer psyche. So these categories, sometimes consumers are willing to trade up and go into a premium, but other consumers are trading down. Part of this amazing part of the story of private brand is that many retailers have done an amazing job of getting their own brand out into the store with similar quality, with similar taste, with similar forms as the national brand. And I think what this is showcasing is, first, one, having a variety of options in your portfolio are so important because of what the consumer is seeking. But innovation, you'll see, well, I'll talk about this as an overlay, is absolutely needed in order to get the right attributes that can be differentiated so that private brands have a lane for growth and national brands have a lane for growth. That's how this industry is going to grow. So this gives you an idea, though, of where consumers are leaning in more from a premium national brand perspective and a private brand perspective. Now, this is not something you would typically show at a webinar, but I wanted to give you this vantage point. So this is taking a look. If you look around the vertical axes, you'll see private label unit share. And then when you look at the horizontal, it's the private label unit share change. So when you see this, you're able to see which categories where private label has really taken hold of some strong share, as well as those where maybe it's missing the mark a little bit with consumers. And part of that's going to be back to, does the private brand really deliver on the taste, the flavor, the quality, maybe the convenience? Maybe they've been influenced by social media, so they're buying into some of the national brands. Maybe it's about the experience that they get with national brand versus private. There's many reasons why some would be above and below the line, but at a minimum, I think that it's important to see where they're winning. And if you play in those categories, how do you win with them? And if there's categories where it's not hitting the mark, how do you help those retailers and within those categories really bring consumers into that category through with you and lift them up as well? This takes a look at the price tiers. And again, just to reemphasize, this is not based on how products are marketed. This is purely based on looking at price tiers. And when we do that, we look at private brands, and we look at value, we look at mainstream, premium, and super premium. And you can see from a food and beverage standpoint how the middle is getting a little squeezed from a food perspective. Non-food is a little different. So as we look at non-food, you can see that mainstream actually has gained a little bit, but both food and non-food see bifurcation, meaning consumers buying both private brands as well as premium and super premium within each of those areas of the store. So I think, again, the way this industry is going to play out, I think, is through innovation. And the innovation needs to play a nod towards the bifurcation we see with consumers. If you're in mainstream, it absolutely doesn't mean you don't have an opportunity to grow, because as you can see, non-food is, and I will tell you, mainstream loss has lessened. So it's not as much as it was earlier in the year. So there is a role for mainstream. I think the key to that is communication, really getting out there with targeted marketing, with going into loyal consumers, incentivizing them to buy one more, and doing some very curated, maybe purchase-based audiences that you can get different messages to different consumers. So I don't want people that are playing in mainstream thinking, oh my goodness, this is not good. It's not a positive right now, but there's absolutely a way to turn this around and get consumers embracing all of the tiers. One more view of the tiers, and what this is showing you is a little different view. So first it gives you the view of, okay, so what's the share of each of the segments, whether unit share or volume share. So again, mainstream is where the majority of it is. The premium and super premium are much smaller. And so that's why I'm saying mainstream has got to find a way to turn some of this around. And you can see where the share has shifted in 23 and then in 24. This is looking at food and beverage. Again, non-food, mainstream actually is outpacing from a share perspective. So non-food is different than food. But this just shows you that more work needs to be done about communicating from a mainstream perspective. But at the same time, considering innovations into the premium and super premium, what I don't urge the industry to do is put all into premium and super premium, because I don't think everyone can afford that. It is a smaller segment. You probably do want to have a mix of products in your portfolio that can fit into especially the mainstream and the premium and super premium. And if you're a value brand, you still have some work to do, because it's either your gap to private brand that's missing the mark. It could be the value proposition, could be your size, but you need to investigate to see what do we need to do to turn that around. All right. Who's driving all of this? Everybody always says it's got to be the high income. They're driving bifurcation. Well, here's the interesting fact. So on the left-hand side, we have low income, and on the right-hand side, we have high income. And on the left-hand side, you will see that it is for sure that low income will lean heavily into private brand, more so than more so almost as which is interesting because it's less than the share shift for upper income, which no one believes that upper income is trading down into private brand, but they are. And part of that is a testament to what retailers have done to, again, have private brands that are mirroring the same quality and flavor and profiles that national brands have. So as you look, though, at both sides, and again, this is food and beverage, when you look at both sides, bifurcation is happening at both low income and high income. So that is happening. A little bit more pronounced in high income, which we would expect. But when it's that psyche, even of low income, they're making a lot of sacrifices. But there are some places where they will indeed invest a little bit more because they want to reward themselves. They want to treat themselves. They want to have an out-of-home experience in the home. Whatever their reasoning is, they are willing to make that because they are making so many other trade-offs outside of just their food and beverage spend. Now, where are they shopping? I talked about their shopping at value channels. So this gives you a decomposition of growth. So it's think of it as a contribution to growth chart. And on the left-hand side, you'll see where the different channels, the percent of dollars that they each represent. You see 23 where there was a lot within mass and club and small format. But in 24, because of what I told you earlier about 23 being the year of mobility and 24 is all about the unscripted consumer, then we've seen them really shift more into the value mass and club. And on a smaller scale dollar, it was too small on here, and pure play e-com. So pure play e-com is getting way more than its fair share. In case you're wondering how fair share is calculated, it basically is with the share of sales and then the share of growth. So it's share of growth over share of sales gets you to those fair share indexes. So that's how that's calculated. And then as we've looked recently, grocery is actually trending up. It has been unbelievably tough for grocery because of the shifts into value channels, but we do see some positive momentum. I think a lot of what grocery has done to reduce some of the prices, to get very smart about the assortments and the pricing of those assortments and communicating that out to consumers through all the different channels of media, I think that's helping, but they got a long way to go. Club and mass have really hit the sweet spot with consumers, and they have shifted more, and they're doing, you're going to see this in a second, but smaller trips, but more often to those channels. When we look at, kind of think about the composition between product mix and item price. So when consumers are making some of those choices, what was kind of the driver between the channel shifting to the value accounts? And it really is a little bit of product mix, meaning trade down, manifesting primarily in the form of the channel shift. But the bigger one is obviously the shelf price. So they choose the value channel. That is one of the big drivers of choice. It is what then gets them into the channel. And we do see consistent stream of premiumization, but it really is about price being one of those big drivers for overall choice and price change. Now, I also kind of mentioned that e-com was 35% of the growth and 10% of the sales. And many of you often say, well, is that coming from delivery, brick and mortar? Where's that coming from? So that is the chart on the left. The chart on the left will show you the percent of total omni sales that comes from pure play e-com being 2%, brick and mortar delivery shipment, which is 3%, but totaling up to the 10% that I mentioned. And then you can see that the biggest contribution to omni-channel growth is indeed the brick and mortar delivery and shipment. That is absolutely driving more than just pure play e-com. Not that pure play e-com isn't helping contribute to the growth, but the majority is being done by that brick and mortar delivery. And I also talked about convenience declining. So this shows you, as we were in 23, there's, I'm going to start with the very left hand. The purple is Circana's brand new MULO Plus with convenience universe. So it includes food, drug, mass, convenience, online, club, etc., e-com, etc. So it's a most robust view of a universe that's out there. The second one takes convenience out of that. And the third is just convenience. So we're showing you those three universes for a reason. Because you can see that in 23, the year of mobility, you can see convenience did quite well. The other channels were hurting because consumers were going out of home more than in home from previous years. But now going into 24, you can start to see where that out of home swap and more in home manifested itself. So I've been saying we have 1% growth in volume. It actually is more if you take convenience out of the picture. It's about, for Q3, it was about 1.5 when you take convenience out of the picture. So again, I am hoping, I do believe that 25 will be different for convenience. One of the reasons is we hear a lot of companies wanting their employees in the office more than 3 days a week now. So if that happens to more and more companies, then consumers will make some trade-offs. They'll still source meals from their home. Over 86% of meals are sourced from the home. I don't see that changing, but they might indeed go and get a few more occasions out of home than in the home because of having to be at work more days out of the week. All right, the unscripted consumer that I talked about. 4 things we want to talk about here. One is, we've been saying it, but that out of home to in-home shift, I think is important to note, because that was, again, something we had not seen quite that dramatic in recent years. And so that was a driver. When indeed they started to embrace these value channels and they embraced the compounded pricing that we saw in the pervasive value, they shop differently. They are making more trips. We see 8.7% more trips, but fewer items per trip, which is down about 11%. In total, though, we're still seeing growth in volume, but it's how they're getting it that has really changed. And when they go in for those smaller trips, a lot of it's for that just in time for what I need. And that means the perimeter is getting hit more often. And we've seen an uptick this year with more ready-made, like ready-made meals, or going in and grabbing a meat, or maybe getting some produce or dairy. But that has been kind of the growth for 24. We think that's going to shift a little bit, kind of even out in 25. But I think more than anything, as I share with you more about the trips, getting smarter about these trips is going to be critical for those of you that might be hovering more center store. And that bodes for whether you're food or non-food. The other piece that's happened because of the compounded, that pervasive value, is the categories of buying habits have changed. So there's still some categories that are essential and that we see them on, almost every single, small trip, or even those larger trips. There's some consistent categories you're going to see. But there's some categories that consumers have chosen to not buy as often, maybe not to buy as many. Maybe they've switched to alternatives. One example I give on that is maybe they've shifted from taking a supplement to drinking a protein drink to get some of the nutritional ingredients they might have gotten from a supplement. So the functional beverage is covering two bases as opposed to just hydration. So that's just one example. So that means that some categories have kind of moved or migrated from necessity to a little bit more, I hate to use the word discretionary, but it is. I mean, they're making some choices about when and where and how they purchase some categories. So digging into these, let's start with trips. Consumers I talked about are making 8.9% more trips per year. That then with less items. So on the left-hand side, what that graph is showing you, the purple dotted line is actually the food and beverage and CPG trips, going from back in 21, 170.7 to up to 186. So again, that's where we get the 8.9% more trips. But a decline of roughly around 11%, I believe the number was, going from 10 items per trip down to about 9.2. And you may be saying, that's just like one product. It could be your product though. So that's a big deal if you're not part of that trip. And some of the trips are 1 to 4 items. So again, it really is all about the mission and what's on their list. And if you're not on their list, you are getting left off, which is why you're going to see this as one of the things that I feel is going to be critically important. And we talked about these smaller trips as more of that quick trip. So you can see that quick trip has had double-digit growth when we look over the last year to date. But yeah, there's been growth in all of them, but quick trips is the largest and having double-digit increase. And it really does speak to how consumers have decided to do that just in time and just what I need. And this is permeating whether you look at units per trip, or the number of categories per trip, or the number of brands per trip, or the number of UPTCs. They're all down. So it's across the board. But again, because they're making more trips, we're still landing in the same place. It's all about how they're shopping in the mix and how they do it. So that's what this is kind of emphasizing, is that no matter what level you're looking at, it gets impacted with this shopping behavior change. So being part of that mission, being part of that trip is important. And I talked about the fact that that those smaller trips, those quick trips, that a lot of them are destination perimeter before you go center store. And therefore perimeter has seen that uptick. And the center store has seen a little bit of growth, but again, not quite as dramatic as the perishable group. And I think when you think about this, it's all about trying to make the list. What can you do to be part of that consideration set. And if you think, I'm just not in a category that's going to be part of that quick trip, okay, then how can you get one more item in the pantry stocking? How can you maybe be part of the special mission trip? How can you do that in order to try and get your penetration, buy rate, and or frequency up? So were there any categories that did that? Well, this is a list of the fastest growing CPG categories from a volume change perspective. So this is the list. What's interesting about this list is one of the biggest things was penetration. So these categories were able to get into more stores across more channels, and were part of more trips. So that was really where the biggest increase came. And I think it's a great testament back to not forgetting some of those core metrics that if you're only tracking your share, if you're only tracking some basics, you need to go back and add into your executive scorecard consumer metrics, because this is how you're going to win the long game, and how you're going to win outside of top line growth and grow your base business is really making sure you're in all the right stores with the right price and getting on more lists. And or back to my point, if you're like, Sally, I am just not going to be one of those 1 to 4 items that they're going to go after, then fine. Find a way to get one more of your products in the basket, as many trips as possible when it's the basket building, that big stock up trip. Now, in case you're wondering, oh, I don't know what's on that 1 to 4 list, or the 5 to 14, or the 15 plus. These are just examples. So please know this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a webinar. You can work with your partners to get a better view of this, but this just gives you a little bit of a taste. When it is that 1 to 4 items in the basket, then it is that perimeter that hits really close. So deli prepared meat, the deli, refrigerated baked goods, the prepared meals and foods. And then also a little bit, when you think about non-foods, facial tissue, the gastrointestinal, those are part of those. I got to go in. I'm only needing a few items. This is what I'm going to go get. Those items show up whether you're looking at 1 to 4, 5 to 14, 15 plus. Those kind of are pervasive across the different mission sizes. But the pink, or now it looks like red, they were pink, the dark pink, those are the ones that are new to the list for the different missions. And so you start to see a bit more non-food or items for the pet becomes big, especially in that 5 to 14. And 5 to 14 could be, it could be fill-in, it could be, for some people, it could be a stock up and or a special mission. So you can kind of see the variety in there between food and non-food. And then the same with the big stock up list is where you get other categories where treats might be versus food and pet care in those smaller missions. So just showing you this to give you an idea of where consumers are placing their bets for those smaller trips. And if you're not, and again, this is not exhaustive, but work with your teams to find out what missions are you normally on, and absolutely put a plan in 25 to get better penetration and or buy rate and or frequency. All right, so what are other implications of these actions? And I find this really, really fascinating because we talked a bit about the trips changing and fewer items per trip. Well, one of the implications is the pantries have now gotten smaller. Where in 2020, when we were all hunkered down and we were all living in our homes, our pantries got a little, full. So they're at about 162 beverages and foods on hand. We're now down to 142. So again, still have products in the pantry, just not as many, but that is one implication. Another implication is just ingredients and cooking aids for the in-home dinner. Those are also down. I am starting to call them just kind of limited ingredients or short list ingredients for recipes. So this short list ingredient for recipes is also impacting what consumers buy and why those quick trips are part of what they're doing. They're not going in to get 20 items to make a recipe. They're going in to get 3 or 5. But short list recipes are all the rage. The other thing you may have seen is when I showed you that 1 to 4, there was deli prepared meals. That's where you're going to walk in and you're going to get something that the retailer already made for you. You're going to go get the rotisserie chicken. You're going to go get the barbecue. You're going to go get whatever is in there to go home and just heat it up. Heat and eat has also been impacted. In fact, when you look at heat and eat, you can see the gradual growth over the last, 4 years, 5 years actually. And you can see where heat and eat just has gradually stepped up and increasingly helping consumers with time constraints. And when we take a look at which meals that those are contributing to, it is more dinner and lunch. And lunch is, again, if they're home. So we're going to keep an eye on, because if more and more people, we're hovering at about 50% going into the office. So if that continues to increase, the lunch number will come down. But dinner, absolutely, either ready-made meals or heat and eat or short list recipes are really, really driving a lot of consumer choice. And when we look at the appliances that are being used, it does range a little differently whether you're talking about breakfast. And look, the majority of breakfasts are being made in less than 5 minutes. And so you see more appliances there, whether it's the coffee maker, the toaster, the stovetop, getting increased use. But when you look across at the other meals, you'll see the darling in there, which is the air fryer. So that's being used more and more with consumers being so time constrained that they're using that air fryer. I share this with you because obviously time is of the essence from the consumer standpoint. But if you're something that does need to be heated and your packaging doesn't include air fryer instructions, move fast and get that in your next round of, packaging reformat. It's important to make sure that's showcased, because some consumers look for that. They might even search online, air fryer, ingredients, air fryer recipes. And if you're not part of that, you're missing out. So in summary, we think that to succeed, it's what I mentioned earlier. You really want to put the consumer first. You want to dig deeper into understanding and addressing their needs. That means your executive scorecards, if they don't have consumer metrics, we highly recommend that you start doing that, because that is how you're going to get out of just looking at top line growth. What are the ways to do that? Well, first, innovation. So either in your current portfolio or innovating new products within the portfolio or even new brands. You want to attract consumers with the right product attributes, delivering value with solutions to meet their needs. This obviously sounds a little easier when I say it out loud than going and doing it. But your brands have resonated with consumers for many years, or if you're a new brand, then you knew what to zero in on and you capitalized on it. And knowing that you're living in a world that where both retail owned brands and national brands need to find a way to coexist and grow is really gonna mean some differentiation needs to occur. Because it's not gonna be long when retailers say, you know what, my product has that same flavor, I don't need both. Some retailers already do that. So I think it's not long before we have more. But if you can say, I have that plus, then there's some reason and rationale. Plus you have marketing and advertising support that goes beyond the walls of that retailer that can help bring traffic into that retailer, which traffic right now, depending on whether you're on the winning side or on the opportunity side, is key. So attributes are one. Assortment is the next one. When you have all the products in your portfolio, do you have the distribution where you need it to be? If you have not done a price size architecture by channel in the last year, highly encourage you to do that. Because what you want to do is to make sure that you have the right assortment in the channels that are winning and the right assortment in the channels that'll challenged. And you want them to be at with the right size, the right price, and make sure that you have the priorities aligned with what the retailers might be wanting to do. But when you do that, it's really important. I've seen it for many winning manufacturers. Part of it was getting distribution into some of the channels they weren't in before, or maybe in more stores and channels that they were in. So that's key. Lastly, I talked about it before, but targeting right now is so important. The amount of messages I get is overwhelming. I can only imagine that all of us feel that way. And a lot of the messages don't really relate to me. So really doing purchase-based audiences or better targeting than maybe what you're doing today, really assess that. Are you getting to the different cohorts you want to get to with the right, and I know this sounds so trite, right message at the right time to the right people? It's trite, but it is absolutely important right now because of the clutter. And I would also tell you, as you look across the generations, we obviously want to maintain and embrace boomers and seniors because they are such a large group of the population. But getting to younger consumers is harder and harder. And if I've got two boys, and they either use Snapchat or they'll go in and they'll use some other TikTok and some other social media. They swipe really fast. So you have to find a way with your messaging, especially the younger audiences, to capture their attention and to really hook them. If you don't get them hooked and with communicating to them, you're going to miss the mark. That could be through influencers. That could be through your own company. That could be through your brand talking, however that might be. But it is really, really important. So although it's only 3 items here, we feel that these are really critical with that overlay of innovation kind of being a marker here to embrace. And then the executive scorecards, consider those as well. That is the end of our webinar today. I want to thank you so much. We will welcome questions from you. But at this point, I just want to thank you for taking 45 minutes out of your day to spend with us. Thank you and take care.